Congo Square. Artist housing. Joe, that's you, right? Excellent. All right. Okay, now, joining us from California is Joe Lewis, a New Yorker by birth and growing up, but a longtime resident of California. He is perhaps best known as an artist, as a visual artist, who works in many different media, but he is also Dean of the Claire Trevor School of the Arts at the University of California at Irvine. He is a very distinguished artist. He's won a number of national awards, including several NEA grants and other very important and impressive fellowships. His work has been displayed all over the world. And I learned today he's also a blues musician, that's why you're here, I'm sure. But he has a very long history in dealing with art in public spaces and also in managing conflicts between artistic desires and the regulatory powers that be. So with that, I'll introduce Joseph S. Lewis.
Thank you, Scott.
There's one over here as well.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me down to New Orleans. I was thinking about the first time I was here was 1980. I was at a conference at the Contemporary Art Center. And then in 91, as I was driving from New York to go to California, I passed through New Orleans. And then I was kind of headhunted for a job down here, and I came down, I think in 93, and I was sitting with the head of this board, it will remain nameless. And I said, do you think I can be successful here if I don't drink? So obviously, I didn't get the job. Tonight, I just want to muse on a few artists, housing, and urban initiatives, and begin by saying that, at least in recent history, artists have been used and used themselves to pacify areas of problems in urban situations. And, much to their chagrin, once the places have been pacified, they've had to move out because all the rents have gone up and people have bought in and they can't afford to live there. And in New York City, that's pushed them further and further out of Manhattan, out into the boroughs, and who knows where they'll be in the next couple of years. So I would like to start with a group, the Collaborative Projects, which was a group of artists who got together in the late 70s because at that time the National Endowment for the Arts said that they were not going to fund individual artists. So they got together as a group and formed a group so they could be available for funding. And they started doing activities in New York and doing shows in different places, guerrilla shows. They published zines. They had cable TV shows, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the shows they did was called The Real Estate Show. Beginning in the late 60s, the Lower East Side of Manhattan was facing massive disinvestment by absentee landlords. By the late 70s, and up to 80% of the area's housing stock was abandoned and in REM, rather seized by the city governments for non-payment of taxes. By the late 70s and 80s, a growing number of squatter movements and a small but visible downtown art scene developed from within the burgeoning gentrification of the largely Puerto Rican community of the Lower East Side. There's a building down there on Ludlow called ABC No Rio. And I hit a year. And this is kind of how it happened. So ABC No Rio grew out of the 1979 real estate show organized by the artist group Collaborative Projects, in which a large group of artists seeking to foster connections between these communities of abandoned buildings, Puerto Ricans, etc., and the city at 123 Delancey Street occupied the abandoned building and turned it into a gallery to show solidarity with working people in a critique of the city's land use policies, policies that in essence kept buildings empty until the area again attracted investment for developers, and a demonstration of what could be achieved through community solidarity. The show was to explicitly illuminate no legal issues, and it called for no rights. Instead, it was a preemptive insurrectionary. So the show opened on January 1 in 1980. It was promptly shut down before the morning of January 2nd by the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. In the following negotiations with HPD, the organizers of the show were granted the use of the building at 156 Rivington Street, which, by the way, is still active. The space became ABC No Rio. The name derives from the remaining letters of a mostly affected sign that was on a building across the street, Abogado con Notario. ABC No Rio was conceived of as an art-making center, a community-oriented alternative to what its founders perceived as an overly hierarchical art world and gallery scene. It was to be a place where you could do things that wouldn't even cross your mind to do in a gallery. So here are a couple of posters for the real estate show. The real estate show on your left is Becky Howland, and on the right is Colleen Fitzgibbons. So Rebecca Howland, by the way, considered herself and her friends part of a post-gallery movement that what they're after ultimately is not just another art space, but a citizen center where the lines between the aesthetic and the social blurs into meaninglessness. Issues to take up according to a recent manifesto or a long ago manifesto include landlord speculation, tenement rights, property misuses, project housing developments, and arbitrary urban planning. So on January 9th, 1980, the New York Times said a group of artists staged what they called a tactical occupation of their padlocked art exhibition in a city-owned storefront on the Lower East Side yesterday, but were immediately ejected by the police. So let me just kind of give you some background on this. They broke into the building. Okay. They cleaned up the building, they washed the windows, etc. However, they had been asking the city for months to use the site. And the city had said, oh, no, we have plans for this, there's someone going to buy it tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. So months went by, and the artists first occupied the building without permission on December 30th and were locked out 3 days later by the officials of the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Yesterday, after rejecting several alternative sites offered by the city, the artists pried open the back door and returned. So the night before that happened, we were sitting in a loft about this size, and everybody's, Delacroix, people at the barricades, etc. And we had like supplies and everything. And we busted back into the building. When the police came, everybody split. Sure, we broke in, said Alan Moore, who identified himself as a writer, video artist, and a member of the show's organizing committee. But we wrote letters for 6 months first, and they didn't get any answers. Artists are getting pushed around by loft landlords and banks in the city. This has to stop. Okay, anyway. So, this was 1980, so this is 2013, and ABC No Rio is going through a multitude of changes. They had the punk rock Sunday matinee for youth, because the youth couldn't go into punk rock bars. So like the 12 to 17 mega death folks, very successful deal for years. They also have a silkscreen process, Photoshop, the whole thing. Make a long story short, 2 years ago, they got $1 million gift to buy the building anonymously. And this is a building that was held together, lit by gum and 2x4s. Now, when they say when the city gives you a property, it ain't like all fixed up. You know what I'm saying? It was like this place is always a shambles. It was always falling down. The roof was always jacked up. But over the years, people got together and put this thing together. So I just want to go to some other things which are a little more, a little different. This is all we'll say, Sean. Sorry. 42nd Street, New York. And kind of listening to the last presentation, sounded like, kind of the same kind of thing happened. And those people went up to 42nd Street to see this place, So the 42nd Street Development Corporation was created in 1976 to rescue the west end of Manhattan's 42nd Street from 50 years of neglect and misuse. The corporation built Theater Row, a complex of off and off-Broadway theaters and restaurants between 9th and 10th Avenues, and planned the reclamation of the historic 7th to 8th Avenue blocks. So this was like the before, and that's the after. I don't know. Before, after. Before, after. I'm sure this isn't what your folks want. And I guess it was Robert A.M. Stern, the dean of architecture at Yale, who is kind of one of the major people in the redesign of the 42nd Street area. So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about this article by Eric Lobenfeld in 1990, Pace University Environmental Law Review. And it starts off by saying, I want to spend a few minutes talking about a development project that has been in the planning stages for years, and the lawsuits that have kept it there. The 42nd Street Development Project has received overwhelming support from citizens, city, and state politicians, and every governmental entity, body, or agency that has ever considered it. Yet, the project has been delayed because of litigation that has created a possibility, although certainly hope it doesn't come to pass, of one of those rare instances where every battle is won, but the war is lost. So much for redevelopment. The next group I want to talk about is the Actors Fund, which kind of comes out of that 42nd Street group too, which has, on the 42nd Street where the off-Broadway theaters are, they also built housing for performing artists. And there are a couple of high-rise buildings there. Recently, they've kind of continued to do this, and here the Actors Fund, in response to the need for affordable housing, the Actors Fund is working to create these kinds of buildings. This one is in the heart of downtown Brooklyn. Westbeth, which is an artist community in Manhattan, is totally filled with artists of all kinds. The Westbeth, located in the far west village of New York, Westbeth's artist housing provides affordable living and workspaces for artists and their families. Opened in 1970 through funding provided by the NEA and the J.M. Kaplan Foundation. And I point to this because this area now is an area which is adjacent to the High Line in New York, which is the meatpacking district where it started, which was another area of complete kind of immoral devastation, both financially, sexually, pharmaceutically. And I hadn't been down there for years, and I went and had lunch with my daughter recently, who lives in New York, and I was like, huh? I was walking around. First of all, I didn't hear anybody speaking English. And I heard languages I'd never heard before. But it is really kind of actually an amazing situation. Ran at my favorite restaurant, Florence, unfortunately, but it's a there I think is something that works to rebuild and create a generator for economic recovery for an area. This is another kind of small project in New York, plan to turn East Harlem Elementary School into affordable housing for artists. And I keep going back to this housing piece because, housing is important and housing builds communities. And even though the issue here is about music and established communities, I think that what's really important to point out in all of these situations is that there was a dialogue or polylogue with everybody. And people sat down and they talked and they tried to figure out where they could meet, where they couldn't meet, and they tried to figure out how they could come together and meet in some place. And I think that is really the most important lesson in all of these examples. Baltimore has a number of artists developed communities, but the last thing I want to mention is Santa Ana Arts District, which is in Santa Ana, California, another place of pharmaceutical misanthropy, prostitution, etc., gang violence. But this particular project is a multi-use project. It's 8 square blocks, and it's a partnership between a university, the city, and private entrepreneurs. What's really wonderful about this particular project, it has restaurants, clubs, housing, artist housing, live workspace, and community space. And I'm going to say in closing, so this is called, the Santa Ana Arts Village is an expanding 8 blocks of a creative effort located in a historic city. It comes alive occasionally, but usually it's pretty sleepy. The city of Santa Ana spent about $9 million to improve it. The improvements were between about 8 city blocks and were a major investment in the area's business development and economic growth. Throughout the last 10 years, the city of Santa Ana has experienced an incredible growth, starting by the complete urban renovation and construction of this project, including the Santiago Main Street lofts. However, recently, the artists who took over one of these buildings, and this is where the city comes in, found out that a developer was going to buy the building that the artists were living in and change it into a high-end real estate project. Right? Imagine that. There was a document, which evidently no one in the city could find, that stated that if the artist had 80% of the building renovated, that the building would revert to kind of a co-op situation. The artist could buy it, et cetera, et cetera. And that conversation is still going on. So in conclusion, I just want to say that there's a long history of artists and communities coming together in different kinds of ways to create, to create larger communities. What can we say about the arts? The arts is how we look at history. When we, look at what's happened in the past, we look at how people dressed, what they ate, what they used to get around. We don't kind of count the bales of hay in their barns. So when I go into a situation, I always look for a way to bring people together. And I was with a group called Fashion Motor for many years. It was in the South Bronx. We took a burnt-out building. We put a face on it. We borrowed some electricity from the city. Borrowed a little water from the city also. And what happened in that space was it was a locus for all kinds of people to come together. So we had the South Bronx community, which looked like Dresden, actually, when we moved up there. We had artists from downtown Manhattan. We had artists from around the world come in. And what I used to say my work was really about was about bringing different kinds of people together and not necessarily making objects. And my kind of thesis is that when you bring all these different kinds of people together in one space, and they're focused on doing something that's not particularly theirs, whether it's looking at art, listening to music, how those people think about each other changes. And at the end of the day, that's what's important for all of us to understand, that we have to maintain our communities. We have to let them grow. We have to let them morph into different things. Because in the end, our personal space is important, but the larger space, our city, state, and global space is really the focus, I believe, that we need to be looking at. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. That was great.